My name is Laura Brown. I am the executive director of an organization called the Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services. You'll learn a little bit more about us later in the presentation. What I'll do now is have the rest of the panel introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the meat of our time with you today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ellie Mattern, and I'm the Director of Technology for Community Legal Services in Florida.
Hello. I'm Tom Martin. I'm the CEO and founder of LawDroid. Nice to meet you.
And hey, all. My name is Tim Hughes. I'm an attorney and a Help for TN program manager, and I work with Laura Towles.
Great. So you're all in here because we're going to talk about chatbots, but I'm going to talk a little bit at the beginning about what you need to know before you start a chatbot project, or really any project. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about problems. Understanding what problem you're solving for is, the most important step in trying to solve it. And many times I see programs do what's called solution jumping, where they make an assumption about what they think the problem is, and more importantly, what they think the solution for that problem is. And so the first thing you should do, and there's been a lot of sessions on this, so I won't rehash it today, is trying to dig in with your staff and with your users to see what is the frustration, what is the pain point, get the who, what, when, where, why about how this is happening in your program, and really sit down and think critically about, okay, what problem are we solving for? Are we trying to make it so that people can have documents easily generated? Are we trying to provide a way for them to find information on our website? What is it we're solving for? Once you've thought about the problem, then we're going to go into drafting an RFP. So most LSC programs have requirements where they have to get bids from multiple vendors. And so crafting this RFP is actually a really important part of your process. One of the examples I like to give is if you were trying to go from Earth to the moon, there are, a rocket, that's a way to get there, saying to the heaven. Those may be more viable solutions than others, but they are all, is that better? Okay. Right in front of my face.
Yes.
But they are all potential solutions to how you get to the heavens. And as much as possible, I would leave your RFPs open to the problem you are trying to solve rather than the solution you think you want. And because of that, it's going to give vendors the opportunity to come at you with new ideas that you may not have even considered. That when you think through it, you may say, hey, that's a really interesting way to solve that problem. Let me talk to them some more and get more information. So then we go into the actual meat of crafting that RFP. As a previous vendor, I will tell you, it's really awesome if you give multiple weeks for people to write proposals. They take a lot of time. We spend a lot of time thinking about the answers. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen proposals drop and I have 3 days to respond. So not so fun. Try to give people a minimum of a couple of weeks, but I really recommend 3 weeks to respond to proposals. Again, focus on the problem. Here's another one that you may not have thought about or heard about, is thinking about timeline flexibility. So many of you are getting TIG grants, and you've already allocated a certain dollar amount that is acceptable for that problem-solving venture. That problem-solving venture may actually cost way more than what you originally thought, but if you can be flexible on time, a vendor may be able to say, hey, I can fit this in between other projects. And so if you're, when you think of that triangle, it can be like cheap, fast, or quality. If you can change the timeline of a project, you may be able to get your budget lower. You may actually get a better quality vendor for a lower dollar amount. And so thinking about what your timeline is really critically is really important. The other thing that I put up here as an image is I like to provide a grading rubric to potential vendors because I want to tell them, here's what we care about the most. I care the most about your references, your previous experience with legal aids or the project or whatever it is that you value. If the dollar amount's the most important thing you value, make it the highest part of your rubric, and it's going to send a very clear message to your vendors. You've got to be at this level or else. Next. Evaluating proposals. So I like to say grab a friend, grab lots of friends, because this is one of the few times that I actually agree with design by committee, because you want to have a bunch of different voices in evaluating the RFPs. Because when we evaluated the RFPs for the TIG project that we're talking about with a chatbot that we're doing with LawDroid, I had one person who did not rate a single vendor over 55% in any category. Like, that was it. That was his baseline. And then you have me, which I guess I'm a much more liberal grader than I thought I was, where everyone would have gotten A's and B's if they had been graded on like a scholastic scale. And so normalizing for that across the board is really important. Anonymizing and scrambling. This is a small community. Many of us know each other. And so where possible, if you can anonymize or make it so that you're not going to have confirmation bias, we already like this person, we already know that they do good work, and really give an open field opportunity for people who are trying to present an opportunity or a way to solve that problem. I really encourage that. Standardize your grading rubric so that you, as much as possible, don't have somebody who's just making up numbers. And so what I do is, if you'll go to the next slide, sure. You can see I actually made an Excel spreadsheet where I had drop downs for every category, where it was like 0 if they didn't respond to it, 2, 3, well, you know, whatever the number was out of, based on how they did in a defined rubric, in an attempt to try to make that as normal as possible. All right, so you're sailing right along, you're doing really well on you've picked your vendor. Now you have to do contract negotiations. Now, some portion of you in here are attorneys. I am an attorney. And so who doesn't love a contract? Here are some things I'd love you to think about if you're not already when you're coming up with statements of work and the actual finalizing the contract. I had a law professor who used to say YP and MP. Is that a your problem or a my problem? There are so many times that I don't see defined in products or in projects whose YP or MP something is. Whose YP, whose problem is it to design the look and feel of the site? Whose problem is it to come up with the content? Who's going to be the project manager for the project? Is it an internal project manager? Is it an external project manager? And so defining those roles at the onset is really going to make your project that much more successful. In the statement of work, I cannot stress to you enough, copy lock dates. Copy is a fancy word for text, and copy lock dates means everybody must provide the text that we said is going to be in the app, the chatbot, the whatever you're building, the website, by X date. Because if it's not, it's going to push back development timelines. And that's an agreement we have all come to at the beginning when we're all still friends. So copy lock dates, deliverable dates, defining those YPs and MPs, and then a decision maker. Who at the legal aid has final sign-off authority on all decisions? And I really encourage you to make this one person and not the one person who has to then go to another person to get approval. That's not a one person. That's a 2-person at most or at minimum. And generally it's more than that. One person has to own the project. I'm a big believer in having one captain of a ship and everybody else reports to that person. And they have the privilege, the responsibility, and the honor of being the one that is successful or falls behind on because of their decisions. That's okay. That's good. Designed by committee, not so good. And so a single decision maker makes it really clear for the vendor and the legal aid to say, well, who gets to make this decision? It's that person. All right, getting the project started. So when we started with LawDroid, CLS is doing a chatbot project wherein we're putting a chatbot on our website so that clients can help find some information and help navigate to information on our content. We have opted, and Tom's going to go into this later, we have opted not to use an AI model, at least not at this iteration in this phase of our project, but we are using what is it called? The tree? I don't know. A decision tree, logic tree. Thank you. A logic tree methodology for our decision. And so getting the project started, legal aids can ask the vendor, if you've never done a TIG project, this is your first ever, you've never been to ITC, that's cool. Ask the vendor, what can I get started on? They'll probably tell you the copy. Mm-hmm. And if not, then they maybe have something else that you can do. When in doubt, mock-ups and workflows, because it's going to force you to think through things you may not be thinking about. Yes. I do not expect you to read this, but the day that Tom came to our office for our official kickoff meeting, our team had already sat down to talk through, so what is this bot actually going to do? And have those conversations where we said, I need it to do A, B, and C. Okay, well, if if somebody clicks A, then what happens? Well, what if they didn't mean to be there? Then what happens? And then have that entire conversation so that by the time Tom showed up, we said, hey, how do you feel about this initial workflow? Where is it wrong? Where could it be improved? And they did have feedback based on previous projects, but we had done our homework beforehand. We weren't waiting for someone else to tell us how to kick off our own project. So that's a good segue. And I didn't say this, a couple of things. One, I would really love to take questions along the route. You can put them in the thing. I will be checking the app, but very much as possible, I prefer a conversational session. So if you have comments, questions along the way, please let us know. And then also, as we read from left to right, we're going sequentially from the very beginning of the project into longstanding bots that have been in existence and maintaining them. Over to you, Tom.
Hey, y'all, can you hear me? Great. So I founded LawDroid about 8 years ago. And so we've been working on this problem for 8 years and getting better and better along the way. Of course, we started with good old-fashioned AI, and now we've added a generative AI layer. If you happen to attend the generative AI integration session that happened earlier, with, if you're at all interested in that, that's something that we do. And we've also worked with, I think, a dozen at this point, legal aid organizations. And so I'm very familiar with your world. I've even helped legal aid to put together RFPs. So if you have any need in that regard, let me know. But first off, I want to just backtrack a little bit and tell you about the old school AI, right? The conditional logic. You could see a picture here of our system. It's a software as a service application. So like once we set up this type of chatbot for you, you could actually edit it yourself from our system. It's not anymore the days of the captive vendor thing where you have to go through them to fix it or change it. So in that system, you can create a workflow like this. If you could create a flowchart, you could create a chatbot. And in that decision tree, we can map over very easily the kind of flowchart that Ellie put together. And you set up your conditional logic. So if a certain condition is met, then it goes on. So for example, if they have a certain income level, they may qualify. If not, they don't. The benefits of this, because especially with generative AI right now, we're all caught up in that, but this still has good application because it gives you fine-grained control over what happens next. Whereas with generative AI, right now, we're working through methods of making that more controlled, but with this, you have the final say. And also you can really track analytics really well. So all of those choices that people make along the way, all of their demographic information, we have these beautiful charts that you could look at on a monthly basis, quarterly, and you can see how everything's playing out. And a couple of the use cases are, lead capture or qualifying. I know that everyone has a bottleneck in qualifying people as to whether or not they should receive legal aid or not. And there's a lot of lost time in conversations with people that don't qualify. So it'd be best to use that time towards those that can and existing customers and clients. So we can help take that burden off of your shoulders, or at least minimize it. And also document automation. A lot of the work that the lawyers are doing, you could productize it so that the bot asks the questions, fills out the documents, emails it to your lawyers, and the lawyers have work with practically a bow on it, where it's 80 to 90% done, and then they talk with the client, polish it up, and it saves a lot of time. So the new school approach with generative AI is unstructured. So this way, you can upload, a group of documents that it's going to draw its information from, and then use a process called RAG that I'll get into a little more detail in a minute but it stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. You may have heard about that in an earlier session. And the benefits to it is that you could really deal with a vast amount of information. You don't have to go in and create all of the structures about if-then to control it. You could still receive some analytics, although they're not as specific or fine-grained as you do with the old school AI. And the use cases for this are immense. But one of them happens to be Q&A. So you have people calling in for legal information. You upload all the documents that you already have, either to train people with or that you're handing out in brochures, and you make that instantly accessible so that somebody asks a question. It could be on the website. It could be on the phone. We actually integrate with phone systems. They ask a question, they get an immediate answer. And you could also append a message to whatever answer you provide. It might be like, hey, we're going to have a workshop on this next week. Here's a link so you could sign up. And also content generation. They could help you with ideation and providing additional content to people. So why would you use AI chatbots? With all this discussion of it, in answering frequently asked questions, conducting intake and qualifying people, filling out court forms and legal documents. Actually, one of the projects that we had with Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services was to stand up a solution where people could go on there if they were looking to get divorced, easily fill out their divorce documents. We also worked with the Supreme Court of Tennessee in creating a workers' comp claim form that people can easily fill out, get submitted to the Workers' Comp Bureau. And the benefits of it, obviously, are that you can get a lot more done with less staff and less of a strain on your budget. And you could scale your services that you're providing beyond your physical and financial limitations. All right. I wanted to get into this a little bit because it's kind of a black box about how generative AI is working and providing answers. So this thing, retrieval augmented generation. So it's a process for optimizing output from a large language model. If you go away with nothing else but this concept, it might be simplistic, but I find that there's a lot of confusion about this. On the one hand, we have ChatGPT, the one that is the scourge of making things up and hallucinations, right? And everybody's afraid of that. On the other hand, separately, we have applications and software that is built on top of that technology that powers ChatGPT, okay? On this side, that's layered on top of that technology, vendors like myself, we add additional safeguards to make it work for you and work in a legal context. So what is that? We screen for privacy issues. You know, we make sure that the security we're using encrypts the data when it's submitted to us. It's encrypted at rest. We have an SSL bank grade certificate to protect it. We also make sure that the policies that we have with the large language model providers ensures that it's not going to be used for training purposes. So, and the additional thing is that with RAG, you can see that the person submits a question, it gets matched against that source material, you know, symbolized by the books there. And then only from that source material is the question answered. Okay? And we take several different measures to ensure that that's the case. One, the mere fact that the question is being tied to a source of truth limits the LLM from going beyond it. Just in case there's any possibility that it would, with prompting, that you've heard a lot about too, we could further narrow the direction of the LLM to only focus on that information and further direct it that if it doesn't find the answer within the context, which is the industry term for the source of truth that we're talking about, it simply says, I don't know. In which case, you know, like in some cases it's bad, but in this case it's good. You don't want it to make something up, which it doesn't. So we can reduce hallucinations add the ability to build in additional safeguards, and also test it for accuracy. So we're not just taking it as God's given truth, we're testing it to ensure that the responses it's giving are accurate. And also you can fine tune the output too beyond that in some ways that, that I've done recently, which is, we recently, like with North Carolina, we were fine tuning the output so that be more empathetic in your response, you know? Be a little more conversational to make sure to provide the response in a 4th grade reading level. You know, so there's so many opportunities here to ensure accuracy, privacy, security, and also to further make it something that's palatable for the people that are receiving the message. So the privacy and security dabbled in a little bit in it about hallucinations. The training data is the training data that you're providing to an LLM. Is it external or internal facing? What do I mean by that? So the training data, if an LLM were to be trained on something, an important consideration is, are you using that data to generate content? Which is mostly the case on ChatGPT. You ask it something, it generates content, right? But a different way of using an LLM is for analysis, right? So it's not telling you something, but you're telling it something, and then it's analyzing what you're saying and then sending you in another direction. For example, somebody calls in, says, they hear the message, are you a new customer, an existing customer, or is this something else? They say, hey, I just started working with you guys. We can run that through an LLM, and it understands just from saying, I just started working with you guys. New customer sends you down that route. See, there's no possibility, right, in that situation of giving any data over to them because we're simply using the LLM to actually think through that process. Data ownership is also important. Where does it reside? If they're Canadian, for example, it has to be on a Canadian server. How long is the data going to be held on to? Is it a week? Is it a month? Just to be clear about that in the privacy policy that you have with the people that use your system. And who owns it? You know, is it the provider, a vendor like me saying, you hand it over to me, I own it, and you have to come back to me, which we don't do that. But you want to be mindful to look for those kinds of terms in a contract that you put together. And then finally, the security, as I mentioned, you want to make sure that at a minimum, they have bank grade SSL connection that anyone should have at this point, state of the art, and encryption to protect the information. So there's critical ways, just to reinforce it, that you can use generative AI right now, where it's ready for prime time to answer questions, to qualify people, and even provide productized services using a hybrid of not just generative AI, but also our existing good old-fashioned AI that provides all of these services, which to me, and one of the reasons why I've been here for a number of years to this conference, is that it's a perfect marriage of what we do and what you do. Because together, you can serve many more people and really throw open the doors to access to justice. Finally, I'll just mention that this is one of the projects we put together with Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services, a legal wellness checkup, because when they're starting a relationship with you in terms of legal aid, what needs do they have? And so this thing does a fantastic job of walking people through questions, identifying different legal issues, and really opening the door for how they can be helped. And from the legal aid organization's standpoint, it provides a great menu, right, for the lawyer to know this is what I need to talk to this person about. And no human time has been invested yet, right? The staff time hasn't even been burned yet, but you have all of this information at your fingertips to help them if need be. It might be they're in the wrong jurisdiction, so you don't have to waste your time. And I know that Laura and Tim will talk more about that, and I'll hand it over to them.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right. So now the part of the presentation about maintaining a bot, now that you've gone through your RFP and you've gone through the design process. And then when you get these things, then what happens? What does their life cycle kind of look like in an organization? Just by way of ground setting, Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services, or TALS, is not LSC funded. So just keep that in mind, right? So RFP processes, they're wonderful and awesome and amazing. And if you're LSC funded, please continue doing that. But we don't have to do that, right? So it's really cool how we're able to work with different developers without having to go through that process. We do go through a process and vet our vendors and developers very, very carefully. But, you know, just, if you're not LSC funded, you might have a slight more flexibility on that. TALS has been around since 1977, and we are really, really small. We were formed as what's called a state support agency way back when, a long time ago. Just about every state formed a state support agency, and I see some people shaking their heads. And we are one of the few that are left. I think there's about 10 that are left still in the United States. TALS is still around. We do a lot of work to support all of the LSC funded entities and other access to justice providers in the state of Tennessee. We do an annual conference. We maintain a website that provides information that's more client facing that the legal aids can use. They let us put their materials up there so it gets their brochures out more across the state. And then all of our chatbots live on that website as well. It's called Help for TN. We also do provide some legal services, direct legal services as well, through a statewide helpline. And we also run the disaster helpline. Some of you may be aware of, when a disaster strikes and a FEMA declared disaster is around, there is something that is implemented then, which is a statewide disaster legal helpline. We do maintain that in collaboration with FEMA and the American Bar Association. So it's just a little bit about us and what we do. So we have a staff of 4 full-time people. So we're very, very tiny. So we're just trying to give you some information about how we make chatbots work for us and how we're able to serve more people and how we're able to amplify the resources to make sure that more Tennesseans are able to use these bots. All right. So that was our practical consideration. Sorry. So I'm going to throw it to Tim now to kind of talk just a little bit more about Help for TN.
Yeah, just kind of wanted to introduce y'all a little bit to TALS and the website we run briefly. It is called helpfortn.org, and it's the state support site. And if anybody were to check it out, it would probably look familiar to some of y'all. We're on the DLaw 9 platform, so I know a lot of access to justice organizations are on there. And in kind of keeping with our role, what we really do is this website's a clearinghouse for booklets and forms and videos and all of the great things that the 4 big legal aid programs in our state create, as well as the courts and other legal service providers. And then we have a little bit of our own original content as well that our lawyers and volunteers, we draft blog posts and things of that nature. But really most relevant today is helpfortn.org is home to our chatbots. So we currently have 4. We've sort of touched on them a little bit. We'll go into a bit more detail, but we have Renter Defender. We have Workers Champion, which is our workers' comp bot. We have Family Champion and the Legal Wellness Checkup that Tom just mentioned. So I think Laura's going to start by diving a little bit into Renter Defender.
Yes. So the first bot we wanted to talk about is our Renter Defender bot. It is a really good case study because it is a bot that has had, gone through the design process, been up on Help for TN, and is also, we're currently working through a new iteration of Renter Defender, a new add-on process. So, the problem that was identified through COVID was there were tons and tons of people, tons and tons of tenants with questions about landlord-tenant law, about tenancy, about eviction. So the problem was quickly identified. It quickly became an issue in the state of Tennessee, probably in many of your states as well. And then we were trying to figure out a creative way to offer more support to these tenants where they could get information in a very quick and digestible manner without having to make phone calls to folks, kind of from the privacy of their own home type of situation. The funding for this came about through a grant from the state of Tennessee. some CARES Act funding was allocated to TALS, and TALS was able to use that funding to create this bot for, citizens across the state of Tennessee. Tim, you want to talk a little bit about team and metrics, like the whole design process, because that did happen slightly before I came on board with TALS, and then I'll come back and talk to you about what we're doing with Renter Defender now that COVID has calmed down just a bit.
Sounds good. If you don't mind advancing it one, we'll give you just kind of a little look at what Renter Defender looks like for users. So ultimately, it works in a lot of the ways Tom was describing, in that it asks users questions. So, it starts by gathering up some demographics. Importantly, it asks county. That matters in Tennessee because we have the Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, but it only applies to about a dozen or so of our biggest counties. So that's a big factor, and the law may be different depending upon where you live. And then ultimately it gets around to the questions that you're seeing up there. And these are questions that really we've pulled from TAL's experience of running a statewide legal helpline. We talk to about 5,000 Tennesseans a year. We talk to folks about every civil legal issue that they could have. And I suspect you won't be surprised to find out that landlord-tenant is really at about the top of that list. I think it made up 18% of our calls last year. So these were the kind of problems that folks were telling us that they're facing. And then as for the answers, there's not really AI magic to Renter Defender. It's more of the branching logic where we actually put together a group of lawyers, scripted the answers to make sure that it would, be responsive to their questions or provide referrals to, to additional help if they need. So I hope it might be of some help to talk about a little bit about the team we used. We had 3 attorneys at Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services, which, as you heard, is just about our entire staff. We had 3 attorneys from Boots on the Ground legal aid programs who were in and out of courts every day. And then we had folks from the Tennessee Housing and Development Authority, the Fair Housing Council, and of course, Tom from LaDroit. I'm afraid I won't be able to dazzle you with huge metrics yet. We're still, I just attended a CLE on how to get folks to go to the things that you're building. But in 2022, we had about 1,400 people use the bot. The next year in 23, we had over 1,800 people who used the bot. So it's a nice little jump, but I still think it's kind of a fraction of what it could be and what it should be. So I will say, though, in preparing for today and this, it's been kind of an inspiration to go back to our partners and look at, constantly updating these older bots and working toward outreach. So, Lauren, you want to talk about our next bot?
Absolutely. And just quickly on Renter Defender, it also, the next iteration is something called the Housing Roadmap. And it is actually an Equal Justice Works Fellows project that we were able to get funded through another grant, a kind of an unrelated grant. We were able to put that request into that grant budget, and it was approved. So that was really awesome. And what it basically does is it helps folks, again, it's the bot, right? So it asks questions, and then it helps them come up with resources, potentially an answer and a counterclaim if they are actually facing an eviction. So it can actually work through it, and the work product that they get at the end is something that they could potentially file, or they could use as a list of talking points if they're going to represent themselves in an eviction proceeding. As Tim mentioned, Tennessee is unusual in that we have a certain set of laws that apply to our most populous counties, and then we have laws, basically no laws, right, that apply to our counties that aren't quite as have quite as high of a population density. So we've done a lot of work with our Equal Justice Works Fellow and with Tom to make absolutely sure that if you pick Anderson County, it's going to create that answer that is correct for which law applies to that particular county. So it's really, really cool. And we're almost finished with the development. We got slightly held up because of a comma. But that comma has been identified and removed from the product that the bot produces. You have a question? And if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. So this is one where I've actually worked from the funding process all the way on through the development process. We had a very proactive Equal Justice Works Fellow who is very passionate about housing justice. And this was her passion project and the project that she wanted to do. She's actually moved on, but we still are working with her to get this done. We've got some special dispensations from Equal Justice Works because we had a slight delay due to many different factors that were neither TAL's fault nor the Equal Justice Works Fellows' fault in getting the project off the ground and going. So, but it's really, really awesome. And we're hoping we'll be able to roll that out as sort of a companion to Renter Defender if folks are actually facing eviction, just to give them that additional resource. Because as we all know, Tennessee, the funding for legal services all across the United States is very low, right? There's way more demand than there are attorneys that are able to represent folks. And in Tennessee, we have no state allocated funding for any type of civil legal services, probably like many of you. So we're always looking for new and creative ways to empower some of our low income friends to be able to help themselves or at least have some more information through either Renter Defender or through the product that Housing Roadmap will produce. Renter Defender will produce answers and then additional resources at the end. So there's always a product that our bots will produce for folks, and it will email that to them automatically. So it's really, really awesome and really helpful that way. All right, so moving on from Renter Defender, let's talk about the next couple of bots. One that is really cool and I think is somewhat underutilized is our Champion for Family Rights, or our family law bot. It is a bot. In Tennessee, we have pro se forms that can be used for pro se divorces when there are certain conditions that are met, probably like many states. But this bot can actually walk folks through those actual forms and then produce at the end that form fully answered that the pro se person could then file. This was a great partnership with the Tennessee Administrative Office of the Courts, with our Supreme Court, all of the organizations that approve and create those forms. It's really our form generating bot. And it's really, like I said, something that is used, but I think could be used more, because basically right now, if someone wants to do a pro se divorce and there are no children involved, which is the largest category that these forms would apply to, they go to the clerk and they get a packet of, 45 pages, and they just look at it and be like, what am I supposed to do with this? So this is a much more approachable way to break those questions down. And they're just typing it into a chat bot. They type their name, much more approachable way to get those forms completed. And it's not so overwhelming for folks. It helps them with a fee waiver. It helps them with that petition. It helps with the parenting plan for unmarried couples, all pro se forms that are approved by the Tennessee Supreme Court. So like I said, it was a really cool collaboration between our Department of Human Services, Tennessee Administrative Office of the Courts, TALS. And again, this one doesn't provide as much information. It does provide some information, but it also is that form generating component that we're now adding to Renter Defender. All right, Tim, you want to talk about workers' comp? Sorry, did I miss some? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. 1 second. So the question that was asked was about resourcing and about cost. And that actually is one of my bonus questions that we were going to ask. So Tals, I'm going to expand that question a little bit to ask about maintenance and what kind of staffing obligations you guys have had in terms of time and what you need to do to maintain those bots as well. So do you mind talking about cost and resourcing?
So cost, I will say, varies widely. Like, it's really hard for me to say a bot like this will cost X or Y. Like, it depends on developer. It depends on what you're starting with. We now have, a great relationship with LawDroid. So we kind of have a wireframe that's already built. So anything that we do now is kind of already, there's already that background process done. So it's really hard for me to give an idea of cost. Time, we're much more clear on. We always figure on about a year, truly. And you guys may disagree with that completely, but from conception and start and funding all the way to finished product, if you give yourself about a year, we've just found over, with our fourth one now, that gives us time to get all of that done and all of that out and done and tested, because then there's different testing processes we haven't even talked about. There's extensive testing that goes on, not only with the folks at TALS that are involved, then we send it out to the legal aids, have them test it before we go live, and just looking for issues and looking for problems. Do you want to talk? And then maintaining, again, we're a staff of 4 people, so we maintain them along the way. But we do, and when we get to legal wellness checkup, we'll talk about how part of its maintenance was seeking a grant from the American Bar Endowment, ABE, and working with them to obtain funding to kind of revamp and redo a lot of the legal wellness checkup questions, as well as adding different voice components to that.
I'm going to put TALS on the spot like just a teeny tiny bit. If you had to think about in a given month, how many hours would you say you have to maintain the bot once it's created? Or is that very low?
Very low.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure you guys had that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends.
I think that's one of the real benefits to
Yeah.
the bots. Yeah. I think one of the terms I use is it's kind of a force multiplier for us, because we're running a helpline that depends on our staff all the time on the helpline answering questions. If we have this little bot that can do it without, much in the way of us taking care of it, that's very helpful.
Yeah. Very, very low amount of time. But Tom, you may have some different insight into that.
Well, that's what we set it up for. So
Yeah.
it takes not much maintenance, other than maybe some changes in the law from time to time.
Yeah.
To give you a concrete answer to cost, projects can range, obviously, depending on complexity. If it's a very simple, straightforward, like single dimensional thing that it's providing, it could be on one end of the spectrum at maybe around $10,000 to multiples of that, depending on the added complexity. If you have multiple domains that it's servicing, if it's also doing document automation in addition to answering questions and providing information, also, like, is it providing reports? And it could get as complicated as you can imagine, and what your budget can sustain.
And just to put Tom on the spot, that's for the actual build out, but there is an ongoing licensing fee. Do you mind saying what that is?
Yeah, that is, I think, pretty affordable. It's $100 a month for use of the platform, because we do have ongoing costs that are associated with running the systems on our platform.
So hopefully that's helpful. Okay. Workers' comp.
Yeah, I'm going to speed through this bot real fast because I know we got a little bit of a late start, but really I think what's most interesting about it is kind of its origin. We talk about identifying the problem. And in Tennessee, with workers' comp, the problem was that the law changed. And when the law changed, it took away the financial incentive for attorneys to do workers' comp cases. So what happened is basically the Workers' Comp Bureau got together with the Access to Justice community, and rather than kind of being adversarial, said, how can we help people get through this, without a lawyer? How can they navigate this? And the answer ended up being the Workers' Champion bot. So this is a form creator. It automates a lot of the forms that people would need to get through this process. And, one of the things TALS was kind of asked to talk about in this was iteration. And I think this is a really interesting one because, after it launched, the Workers' Comp Bureau and judges sort of identified some other things that we could do with it to make it just work a little better. Some examples were authenticating medical records were a holdup for folks. That adding Spanish to it and conducting some training videos and things that we could put on helpfortn.org. So TALS went to the Tennessee Bar Foundation and they approved a grant, and we worked with the usual partners of the Bureau and with LawDroid, and were able to kind of create this bot and continue to update it to make sure that it was helpful to us.
Okay. Which leads us now to Legal Wellness Checkup, which is our bot that has had 2 distinct iterations over its life cycle. Was this the first one?
I believe this was the very first.
No, actually, it pre-existed in Neurologic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then was adopted by Tom.
Yeah.
So bots can be adopted, just saying. There's an adoption process. So it did, this is its second iteration. And that iteration was funded through a grant from the American Bar Endowment, so ABE. in conjunction with Legal Aid of Bluegrass, right? So the legal wellness checkup has been introduced in a couple of different states. So we helped Legal Aid of Bluegrass with their grant application to the American Bar Endowment. And it was a two-part grant. One, to help them implement a legal wellness checkup in Kentucky. And then two, to help us just kind of revamp and add some new components and new features to the legal wellness checkup here in Tennessee. So we went through every question, we reviewed it. The law, if the law changed, everything was updated. Voice integration was also added in. Yes. At that time, we didn't have voice integration in the legal wellness checkup prior to our American Bar Endowment project. It is a project that is not used so much by the legal aides, but it is used, we find, by case managers and other folks that help low-income clients with different types of benefits and things across the state. And it's a really great tool for folks just to go on and answer the questions and just maybe try to figure out what their legal needs actually are. And then at the end, they will receive resources, links to resources, and those same resources will be emailed to them as well. Tom, anything you want to add there, Tim?
Well, just one thing I would add is that actually wasn't my expectation at the beginning, that people would be using, like people in the field would be using it to, figure out what people's issues are. But that's something to consider too, is that these tools can be both external facing, but also internal facing. And that helps with turnover and, staff changes to keep the information consistent.
Anything else? Yes. Sorry. Okay, so the question was, and I think we have to repeat the questions. The question was, can we talk about metrics and what that looks like for the two different types of chatbots that we've talked about, the branching logic, basically new school versus old school. And I'm going to throw that over to Tom and to Tim and Kelly. Oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought that was the last one. So I do less with the analytics and the data on these than with the helping with the, the front end. So I'm gonna have you guys answer that one.
Sure. So with the old school approach, each and every interaction the user has with the bot is measured, right? So you can run monthly reports about demographic information if they're interested in particular legal topics. Even when they go down the road of the legal topic, it could be every single question about for landlord tenancy, how many people do they live with? What kind of rent are they paying? Is it monthly? Is it under a lease? All of that information, you can look at monthly reports and see how that works out. When it comes to generative AI, it's much more high level. You don't get as fine-grained information from that you can report on. You can, of course, track how often it's being used, maybe the gross level of like different legal topics that people are asking about, but it doesn't yet have built-in fine-grained analytics.
I do want to respond to that a little bit. And we are at 2 minutes till, so I do want to go ahead and commit the speakers that if you don't get your questions answered or if you have no questions, but we will wait afterwards in case you want to come talk to us with specific questions. One thing that generative AI does, or really the thing that I like about generative AI is it may not give you fine-grained analytics, but it can give you an understanding of the way in which somebody would talk about their problem. And so that can help you with SEO and marketing, search engine optimization and marketing of that particular issue. If you keep seeing somebody misspell the same word or talk about it in a different way than you've ever conceptualized, it may help you write a blog post or an article around that. And if you don't have kind of those open-ended questions, you wouldn't have that information.
Tim, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much to offer beyond that. As our volume is still relatively low as far as our bots go. This is the kind of thing, the data that we pull from our helpline that's useful to us of what what issues are we seeing in what counties, what we can share with legal aids. I think all of that's possible with the bots as well. And could be a future as we, continue to staff up.
It's right at 3. Yep.
All right. So if any of you saw my opening this morning and you basically ending the day with me, surveys are important. Please take a minute to fill out the survey. We would love to know how we could improve and have made this more actionable, more useful going forward. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, y'all.